Today's case is a crime that most of us would agree never should have happened. Toxic relationships. We've all been there or known someone who's been there. But combine drugs and alcohol and you have a disaster. Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Zara, and on this channel, we talk about true crime. So if you're interested, please join the fam and hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button too. It's free and it really helps out the channel. And also share the video if you like. Tasha Lucia was born to her mother, Kimberly, on April 7th, 1987 in Fairfax, Virginia. When she was around 6 months old, her family moved to Charleston, and she considered this her home, especially Folly Beach. Tasha loved the beach, and it was her second home. She loved playing dress up with her sisters, baking cookies, and watching Disney movies. She always made the most of life, would never place importance on monetary or fancy things. She was more interested in experiences and cared deeply for other people. Tasha was always willing to give, never expected anything in return, whether it was for a friend or a stranger. When Tasha entered a room, her presence was inviting and her beautiful, genuine laughter was contagious. Tasha was extremely close to her mom and her sisters, no matter how far apart they were. Tasha graduated from James Island Charter High School in 2005, and in 2013, Tasha was 25 years old and living in her James Island, Charleston County home in South Carolina with her 30-year-old boyfriend, Robert Tillman Kronsberg. Tasha was working as a bartender at Locklear's Beach City Grill on Folly Beach and was a great employee and had many friends at her job. Her boyfriend, Robert, was born on October 22nd, 1982 in Charleston, South Carolina, to his parents, Avram and Jane. And he had two brothers. I believe they were older and also loved spending time at the beach and was a pretty talented artist. He grew up quite privileged, with his family being wealthy until he was about 12 years old, because that's when his father's drug addiction got the best of him. He went from living in a mansion to living in the room in the back of someone else's house. Robert turned into a pretty sad, depressed child and then eventually turned to drugs and alcohol himself. He had a variety of convictions from then onwards relating to possession of drugs and public intoxication. He didn't have many friends growing up because he kind of just put people off with his bad behavior, and drugs and alcohol was just a way for him to cope with his sudden change in life. Seeing his father struggle with drugs and alcohol possibly also just naturally led him down to follow the same path. While living with Tasha, he worked in a pizza restaurant in James Island as well. I don't know exactly how long Robert and Tasha were dating for, but it didn't seem like a very long time. But for the time they were dating, it was always on again, off again. Tasha's friends knew that her relationship with Robert could be very volatile at times, with Tasha showing up to work with new bruises and cuts on her face and body, and they knew that Robert was violent at times and would put his hands on Tasha. And although, of course, that's bad enough, her friends didn't really intervene because they just were known to be that toxic couple. They never really thought anything bad would happen until it did. On Sunday, 10th February 2013, Tasha had a shift at work, the Locklear Beach City Grill, and her friend Jessica was meant to work with Tasha that day when Tasha didn't show up for work. So Jessica thought, maybe she just slept in. After all, the night before was a Saturday, so no big deal. She thought, let me just call Tasha. So she called Tasha on the phone, but Tasha didn't answer. And then as the day went on, Jessica continued to call Tasha and she wasn't picking up. It was just really unlike her to A, not show up for work, and then B, not even call or give a reason as to why she wasn't coming in that day. Jessica began to worry, and throughout the day, she continued to feel sicker and sicker, and she just had this intense gut feeling that something was wrong. So at around 5 p.m., Jessica was like, no, that's it. We are going to see what's happening with Tasha. So Jessica, together with another friend from work, they drove down to Tasha's home that she shared with Robert in James Island. When they arrived at Tasha's house, they went up to the door and they knocked. And knocked and knocked and knocked. And no one answered. They knocked several times, but there was no sound or no movement coming from inside the house. They also noticed that the front window, which led into their living room, was wide open. So they decided, let's just climb inside and check on Tasha. Once they climbed into the window and were inside the home, they heard this loud noise, which sounded like snoring. They looked inside the first bedroom and realized that the loud snoring was coming from Robert, who was like passed out asleep on the bed. They shook him awake and asked him, hey, where's Tasha? He kind of mumbled, groaned, but he didn't really say anything. Well, at least the women didn't understand what he was saying. So they kind of like brushed him aside and then decided to just keep looking for Tasha themselves. As they searched the home, they then went into the second bedroom. And finally, they found Tasha. She was lying on another bed in the second bedroom. So they approached her, but she had this sheet covering her. And as they lifted that sheet, there was a large knife sticking out of Tasha's chest. And it was clear she was already dead. Jessica and the friend were so scared and shocked by what they saw, they ran out of the house screaming before calling 911. It was clear to them that Robert had been involved in her death, and they were just so in shock. Jessica had known about their relationship, had seen bruises and marks on Tasha in the past, but to see her laying there, a knife sticking out of her friend who just lay there dead, was unbelievable. They had never imagined that the violence in their relationship would lead to murder. When the police arrived, they went inside to search the home and they found a bottle of vodka, a bottle of ibuprofen, and what appeared to be marijuana, along with another knife on the bedside table laying next to a sleeping Robert. Robert was shirtless and he was covered in blood. The police approached him and tried to wake him when suddenly he sat upright with wild eyes, and then he mumbled some more words. Robert also had a 3-inch vertical laceration to his left wrist, which appeared to be self-inflicted at the time. Robert was immediately taken to the hospital, and on his way there, he told EMS responders he had taken cocaine earlier in the day. The medic noted that Robert's pulse was extremely high. The following day, February 11th, Robert was arrested and charged with murder and possession of a knife during the commission of a violent crime. While Robert was awaiting going on trial for Tasha's murder, he was held at the intensive care unit at Medical University of South Carolina under suicide watch. After the police conducted their investigations and spoke with Tasha's family and friends, it was clear to the police that Robert was the killer. Robert's trial didn't begin until late 2014, and he entered a plea of not guilty. The prosecution presented their case that Tasha and Robert had an on-again, off-again relationship, that they would often get into fights and arguments, and that on the day of 10th February 2013, one of those regular arguments and fights took place. However, this time, this fight resulted in Tasha being murdered. Evidence was presented that on the day before, on 9th February 2013, Tasha had been happy and smiling and spending time with her friends on Folly Beach. She was having fun, and photos of a smiling Tasha were shown to the court. That same day, Robert was working at the pizza restaurant in James Island, and after his shift, he went to a party with his friends. However, despite the two of them being separated, it didn't stop Robert from picking a fight with Tasha. He began sending her text messages, causing an argument. Her friends noticed that Tasha went from being happy and smiling to being angry once she read Robert's texts. When Tasha arrived home later that night, Robert was already home, and their text argument turned into a full-blown screaming match. The argument was about Tasha's ex-boyfriend, about Tasha and her ex-boyfriend having sex. I don't believe she cheated on him. I think he was literally just angry about her having an ex and the fact that she was sexual with her ex. It's believed that during this argument, Robert began choking Tasha. As Tasha screamed louder and louder, Robert grabbed a hammer and hit Tasha really hard over the head. He then continued to strangle her. He then got off her and saw her struggling and gasping for air. He was still furious. So instead of walking away to cool down, like maybe he had done so in the past, he didn't stop there. This time he took it further, way further.
An uncontrolled frenzy, a frenzy without thought. He makes a decision, and that decision is to grab a 15-inch butcher knife, to go down, get on his knees intimately, face to face with the person he is supposed to care about, and stab. And I am sorry to do this, but that's not it.
Tasha
Stab.
was stabbed
Stab.
at least
Stab.
11 times.
Stab.
He went into the kitchen and got a butcher knife. He then came back, knelt down beside his girlfriend who was hurt and struggling to breathe, and then proceeded to stab her over and over and over again, 15 times in total. He then left the 10-inch butcher knife in her chest until she died. It's believed that Tasha was killed sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. He then went into the bedroom and cut his own wrists. He claims that he did this twice, but it didn't work, which is funny and hard to believe, really, because he very easily killed his girlfriend. But when he tried to do it to himself twice, it magically didn't work. He is believed to have taken a concoction of drugs and then passed out on his bed, as police found the vodka, the marijuana, the ibuprofen, and a knife on the bedside table next to the bed that he was sleeping on. However, sometime after Tasha's murder, Robert's phone rang. I'm guessing he took this call before passing out from the drugs and the alcohol. The call was from his friend, Paul Polensky. Paul was Robert's friend. Very good friend, actually, and they worked together in that pizza restaurant in James Island. Sometime after 2 a.m., Paul received a text from Robert saying 911 4 times. So Paul calls Robert on his mobile, but Robert says, no, hang up and call me from a landline. So Paul did. The first thing Robert said to Paul on the phone was, "Don't freak out, but I just killed my girlfriend." Paul just laughed and brushed him off because he thought Robert was joking. Paul and Robert had been friends for a while, and he had worked with Robert earlier that day and knew he went to a party after work. He just assumed that Robert was drunk and talking shit. But as Robert kept talking, Paul realized, okay, this isn't a joke. Paul also knew that Robert was arguing with Tasha via text earlier that night, but didn't realize how bad it got until Robert told him about their fight. Paul testified in court for the prosecution and admitted that Robert told him he strangled Tasha because she was screaming, and he did so to make her stop. He told Tasha he would stop choking her if she stopped screaming, but she wouldn't stop screaming. So he reached around and grabbed an object that was closest to him, being a hammer. He then hit Tasha over the head with that hammer. When the prosecution asked Paul why he did not call the police immediately after Robert's confession, Paul stated that Robert had assured him, promised him that he would turn himself into the police that morning. The jury was shown pictures of Tasha's injuries taken during her autopsy, which included a smashed nose, a black eye, a few cuts and bruises that were on her face, lips, and neck. The wounds on her head were consistent with being caused by a hammer, together with the multiple stab wounds to her chest. The knife and hammer also obviously had Tasha's blood on it. They heard testimony from the forensic pathologist, Dr. Susan Presnell, who conducted the autopsy, and she confirmed that the cause of Tasha's death was clearly homicide. After the prosecution presented the evidence, they made it clear that no one else killed Tasha. Robert was guilty, and finding him guilty was an easy decision. The defense, however, had a reason for the murder. There was a reason why Robert did it, guys. He was intoxicated, and it was in the heat of the moment. In his heart, Robert never wanted to hurt Tasha. His defense lawyer, Charles Cochran, stated, "This case is going to be about what was going on in his heart that night. And that's what you're going to have to decide throughout the course of this week. Yes, Robert killed Tasha, but it was during an argument, a passionate argument about her ex-boyfriend where anger got the best of Robert. He didn't plan it. He didn't prepare the murder weapons. So the jury needed to not decide if he was guilty. He was, but let him be guilty of the correct crime." His lawyer went on to say, "This was all done in a frenzy, an uncontrolled frenzy with alcohol. a frenzy without the benefit of collecting one's thought. The defense argued that if Robert was not under the influence of alcohol, of cocaine, and other drugs, then he would have not killed Tasha. He was not in control of his own actions while under the influence. Robert had turned to alcohol and drugs at an early age and showed signs of addiction as early as 14 years old. He was resistant to counseling in his youth and recently spiraled out of control after losing both his father and older brother to drugs and alcohol. So while he was charged with murder, and yes, he was guilty of killing her, but maybe they should consider finding him guilty of voluntary manslaughter instead, not murder. In December of 2014, after both the defense and the prosecution made their closing arguments, the jury went away and deliberated for a little over an hour and found Robert guilty of murder and guilty of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime.
Indictment for murder, the verdict is guilty.
Robert Kronsberg stared straight ahead as a judge read the verdicts, finding him guilty of both the murder of his girlfriend Tasha Lucia and the possession of a weapon during a violent crime. His mother sat behind him weeping as Kim Lucia, Tasha's mother, was comforted by friends and family.
As Judge Young began delivering his sentence, Robert began cursing and yelling and had to be dragged out of the courtroom by law enforcement agents. He was told to calm down before he was able to be brought back in. His defense lawyers asked the judge for a sentence of 35 years plus 5 years without parole. They said that this was Robert's first felony and that a lighter sentence should be considered. Just to make it clear, they're asking for 5 years in prison without parole, meaning he should serve a minimum of 5 years for murdering his girlfriend.
For this evil to have the rights of life, while I am left to forever grieve for my daughter, unlike an object bought that can be replaced, but a precious gift of life to love for a lifetime, is the cruelest evil of all.
Before the judge delivered his sentence, Robert's family spoke to the court and said that, he was a troubled man who struggled for years with substance abuse. His brother said, alcoholism and drug abuse have robbed him of his childhood, his opportunity, his daughter, his loved ones, and now his freedom. However, the prosecution, together with Tasha's family, stated that Robert showed absolutely no remorse during the entire trial. And right before the sentence was read out, Robert began crying and wanted to address Tasha's family. He looked directly at Tasha's mother, Kimberly, and said, "I'm so sorry that I took her away from you. I swear I loved her very much. I can't believe this happened. I know it doesn't matter what I say now, but I am so sorry." Judge Young said that, this could have been a spontaneous crime of passion like the defense claimed, except for one thing. He said, "You thought she was dead and walked away from her, heard that she was still alive, and you went back and finished her off. You went back and stabbed her, and you didn't just stab her once, you stabbed her 15 times. Judge Young then sentenced Robert to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the hearing wrapped up, Tasha's family was distraught and they cried quietly. And Tasha's grandmother said that they're grateful Robert got the maximum sentence and he won't haunt their thoughts any longer. However, the loss of their loved one, Tasha, will forever be in their hearts and their minds. Robert was serving life at Columbia Correctional Institute, and in April 2017, he appeared on an episode of Lock Up Charleston. On the show, he goes on to say, "This life is over for me." He talked about his crime against Tasha and said, "I stabbed her 17 times apparently," which was a little weird to me. Like he was saying, apparently that's what I did. I'm guessing he was implying that he had no memory of the crime. He said he felt like a dog being jabbed with a stick all day long and that, eventually the dog gets pissed off. He talked about taking 40 sleeping pills and cutting his wrists after he killed Tasha, but that he just didn't die. I don't know. He sounds kind of like fed up and like he really doesn't want to be in jail. He doesn't sound remorseful to me. He sounded kind of like, that's what they said I did and, who knows. He also had a young daughter in Texas, which, I never heard him talk about, at least in that episode, and I didn't read any articles about him mentioning this daughter. It seemed like he was more concerned about him not spending time in jail, his loss of life. On December 6th, 2017, 35-year-old Robert Kronsberg was found dead in his cell at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Colombia. He took his own life. The coroner never released a cause of death, but in the lockup episode, he did mention he made a noose out of the mattress sheet but was unsuccessful. So I would guess he found some way in his cell to end his life. I mean, it's a sad ending all round. Robert did seem trouble. You know, he did need help. But the actions in which he killed Tasha were just overboard. Something just snapped that day. Tasha was so young, and in a relationship that's toxic, you're never gonna have a winner. Unfortunately, no one could predict that their relationship would end in this gruesome and tragic way. Tasha's family now lets her memory live on. And sadly, Robert's family too has to deal with not only his crime, but the fact that he took his own life. I know it's not easy to feel sorry for anything about Robert, anything to do with him, but his family was innocent too. And his daughter and the people he kind of left behind will also have to suffer due to his actions. There was such little information about this case, and it makes you think how many cases like this are happening on the daily. You know, like I mean, have you guys heard about Tasha Lucia before? I've never heard about this case before. And to even find information, like I really had to dig. So I'm like, how many cases are not even being reported on? It's just wild how we are put on this earth and then just taken out by ourselves. Let me know your thoughts down below, guys. I can't wait to meet you in the comments, and I will see you in next week's video. Besitos. Bye.